All right, well, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and begin with our introductions and our welcome. I'd like to wish a good afternoon to everyone and welcome you to the latest webinar in our Prime webinar series, Bolstering Underprepared Students. My name is Ashley Donaldson-Burley, and I'm a doctoral candidate in the School of Education and a graduate research associate with the Prime Center. Before we begin, I'd like to just remind everyone about a few logistical details. So the meeting is being recorded and it will be shared to our website. So if you have colleagues maybe that weren't able to attend, that will be available within the next few weeks. In order to submit questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom. You're welcome to type questions in the Q&A as we go, but we won't be addressing any questions until all of the speakers have gone through their presentations. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Takako Nomi. Dr. Nomi is an associate professor in the Education Policy and Equity program and the associate director of the Sinkfield Center for Applied Economic Research at SLU and a research affiliate at the University of Chicago Consortium on Chicago School Research. Her current research examines issues related to college readiness, transitions from high school to post-secondary education and workforce, and policies and programs supporting persistence and degree attainment overall and in STEM. Previously, she evaluated a district-wide reform of raising high school graduation requirements, its unintended consequences, short-term and long-run impacts of a ninth grade double-dose algebra program to support struggling students, as well as the policy mechanisms to better understand effective policy implementation. Dr. Nomi's research has been supported by the Institute of Education Sciences, Spencer Foundation, and American Educational Research Association. Her publications appeared in Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis, American Educational Research Journal, Journal of Research on Educational Effectiveness, Journal of Human Resources. She also serves on the editorial board of Journal of Research on Educational Effectiveness, the Faculty Advisory Board of SLU Geospatial Institute, and the board of Gateway Global American Youth and Business Alliances, a local nonprofit apprenticeship training provider for high school and college students. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Nomi, and I will turn it over to her.
Okay, thank you, Ashley, for nice introductions. Hold on. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is based on my earlier research with my colleague, Steve Raudenbush at University of Chicago, addressing a strategy to prepare high school students for college, and especially looking at how high school algebra interventions and its impact on college completion. So just to give you a quick summary of what I'm going to talk about. So I will talk about how ninth grade algebra intervention in Chicago helped students complete college. And the effectiveness of this intervention varied considerably by schools. And the intervention was more effective when students took algebra with peers whose initial skills were similar to their own. So which leads to the conclusion that how schools organize instruction really matters. And just to give you a background of this reform, especially focusing on math intervention, so as you might all know that many students in K-12 and college, they struggle in math, and algebra is a major hurdle. And in high school today, now, most states and districts require algebra in ninth grade or earlier, even eighth grade, as part of the college prep for all curriculum. Assumption is that all students need to be prepared for college and algebra has to be taught in ninth grade or earlier. Yet, algebra has the highest failure rates among all ninth grade courses. An important point is most students who failed algebra become off track to graduate and eventually drop out of high schools. Based on the Chicago data, nearly 70% of students who failed algebra classes in ninth grade ended up dropping out of high school. And in college, failing to pass the minimum math requirement is a major obstacle to complete college. So Chicago is really at the forefront of this college prep for all curriculum. And as early as in 90s, they required algebra for all students or ninth grade students in high school. But evaluation of this policy found that the policy was a failure. Why? Well, the success was the policy equalized algebra opportunities. So everybody started algebra in ninth grade. But in the end, math failure rates rose, especially for students with low skills. And the second major point was high achieving students who always took algebra before and after this new policy of requiring everybody to take algebra. And they ended up suffering because peer skills of their algebra classmates declined. So overall, you have disappointing result, but just to highlight how high school curriculum reform actually impact not just course taking, but how school organize instruction. So this is based on a study of algebra for all reform in Chicago. And in this reform, we found two types of high schools. One type of high schools, they already had algebra for all before this policy was implemented. And the policy was implemented in 1997. So before 1997 and after 1997, they already had algebra for all students. And I was looking at the classroom peer ability for those schools that already had algebra for all, which was the left graph. So we simply divided students into 4 groups of initial skills. So high is the top blue bar, and medium high, and medium low, and low skill students. And the y-axis indicate the average peer skills of algebra. So what we saw here is pretty stable sort of trend over time from pre-policy to post-policy, as compared to the right graph, which was a group of schools which offered pre-algebra prior to this 1997 policy, and then eliminated pre-algebra post-policy. So what you see here is that the high-skill students, there was a huge drop in peer skills of their classmates for high-skill students. So pre-policy, they were taking algebra with high-skill students together, but then post-policy, what happened was when the schools eliminated algebra, pre-algebra, they ended up mixing students. So they put low ability students into classes with other students. So for the purple bar was the lowest skill students, where they took pre-algebra before the policy, and when they eliminated algebra, peer skills dramatically improved when when the schools universalized algebra. So overall, this policy was a failure in terms of not being able to improve student outcomes. So what Chicago ended up doing was requiring 2 periods of algebra. So that's the double dose algebra. And that was implemented in 2003 and 2004. So what this policy required was that all students with 8th grade math skills below the national median, which is 50 percentile, to take 2 periods of algebra, which is regular algebra and algebra support class. So for this study, we were able to follow students to and through college. And we had earlier studies looking at 9th grade outcomes all the way to college enrollment. But the most recent studies, we followed the students over time until they completed college. So we have what happened after high school. And just to give you some demographic information about Chicago. So Chicago is the 3rd largest district in the nation. And we have 2003 and 2004 first-time freshman cohort. And the total student number is about 33,000 students and attending 69 schools. And the percent African-American is 55%. Percent Hispanic students is 35%, white students is 7%, and Asian is 3%. So predominantly minorities, and 90% of students are on free and reduced lunch. And at that time, the average high school graduation rate was 60%. But today, graduation rate is much higher than 60%. But this is based on the earlier cohort of 2003 and 2004 high school freshmen. So when they implemented double dose algebra in 2003 and 2004, and the enrollment was based on 8th grade math scores, and the 0 in the center indicates 50th percentile students. And the y-axis is whether they enrolled in double dose algebra. So the policy required students below the national median to take double dose algebra. So what you can see is that the sharp increase in algebra and double dose algebra enrollment at the cut point of 50th percentile, which is a 0 here. Even though this is not a perfect compliance, but many schools ended up following this requirement of enrolling students below the cut point, 50th percentile, in double dose algebra. And another thing that we found was how this policy also affected how schools organize algebra instructions. And the left figure is pre-policy. So we looked at 2001 and 2002 cohorts, relationship between class average skills, and the horizontal axis, their own initial skills. So what you can see is the positive relationship, meaning the students who have initially high skills, this is based on 8th grade skills, do have higher peer abilities or peer skills, and the students with low 8th grade scores do have peers whose skills are also lower. And what happened post-policy, 2003 and 2004, what you can see here is another sharp decline in peer skills at the cut point, 50th percentile in the middle. So what happened was, if your students who just scored below the cut point, your peer skills would drop sharply at the cut point. So the takeaway here is the policy not only changed who should take double dose, but also it affected what kind of peers students have, and it was sharply discontinuous at the cut point. So how do schools implement double dose algebra? What makes these patterns? And the district actually provided recommendations in terms of how schools can implement double dose algebra. So the initial recommendation was this. So it recommended same teacher teaches 2 courses, algebra and support classes, also taught back to back in a schedule. So it's 90 minutes instead of 2 separate periods of 45 minutes. And the same set of students taking the support and the regular algebra courses together. So they recommended this to ensure this continuity of instructions and the same teacher monitoring the same set of students. So this means that the algebra class for double dose students is primarily consisting of students with below median skills, right? But some schools might have implemented this way. So same teacher could be back to back, but the regular algebra class can be mixed with students who are not required to take the support class. So for example, you can offer a section of support class followed by 2 sections of algebra, which is mixed with non-double dose algebra students. So in this case, double dose class or algebra class for double dose students is composed of students with below and above median skills. And the third pattern is some schools might not have adhered to the district recommendations at all. So what we observe here is tremendous variability in how schools implemented this policy. So this scatter plot on the left shows, so one dot is a school. So we plotted schools' implementation of these policies. And this horizontal axis is the extent to which schools complied with the course compliance, Meaning, so I have this little graph, the same one as before. This course compliance is large or high when students just below the cut point have sharp increase, right? So there are many, many schools who have very high compliance, meaning by falling below the cut point, your probability of taking double dose increased sharply. So the gap is larger. But as you can see, many schools didn't comply. So that's the low compliance rate, is meaning that the cut point really doesn't influence sharply in the probability of taking double dose. But you can see tremendous, this tremendous variation in how school complied with this course assignment. And this line in the middle is the mean for this cohort. So for this vertical axis is the dimension of sorting. So low sorting is the top, and then high sorting schools are the bottoms, meaning, so if the schools have high sorting, which means that the scoring below the cut point create this sharp decline in peer skills. So this has slightly negative association, meaning, and not surprisingly, that the schools that have high course compliance, many of them have these high sorting patterns. But interestingly, there's a group of schools on the upper right quadrant. These schools ended up implementing the program without sorting students, even though their course compliance is relatively high. And this has tremendous influence on how the policy was impacting the outcomes. So let me just show you the overall result for 2003 freshmen and 2004 freshmen. And I'm going to first talk about the 2003 cohort. And the outcome is we have total semester completed since 9th grade, and any degree certificate attainment and 4-year degree attainment. So the control mean is the average outcome, so total semesters for students just at the cut point. And the impact means what happened to students who took double dose algebra by falling below the cut point. So here the impact on a total semester is 0.62. So students who took double dose algebra had longer semesters by 0.62 semesters. And for any degree and certificate, the impact is about 5%. So students who took double dose had higher degree attainment by 5 percentage points. And for 4-year degree attainment, the impact estimate is 3.6%. So students who took double dose had higher 4-year degree attainment. But interestingly, we don't see this positive impact in 2004 cohorts. And the next slide shows the impact differences between schools that had small declines versus large peer declines. And we only looked at schools that have relatively high course compliance, meaning based on the figure earlier, this is based on schools that have above average course compliance rate. But half the schools, or some schools, had small declines, and other schools have large decline in 2003 and 2004. So the major difference is that the impact was much larger for schools that have small peer declines, so which is the left side of the table. So the impact estimate for total semester is 0.87 semesters for those who took double dose, and any degree or 4-year degree attainment is very large, 9% and 6 percentage points for schools that had small decline in peer skills. And as comparison, the large decline schools, we don't see any impact for those schools. In 2004, we have much fewer schools that had these implementation patterns of small declines, but high course compliance. And the impact estimate is quite large, but none of them was statistically significant. So we just didn't have the power to detect it, but the pattern is consistent in that the small schools that had small declines had much larger impact in terms of these outcomes than schools that had large declines. So summary and conclusions. Doubling instructional time and supporting struggling ninth graders in math produced positive impact on educational attainment, but only in 2003. So students were more likely to persist and obtain post-secondary degrees and certificates. And importantly, the effects were much larger for schools that did not sort students at the cut point. And this pattern of result is consistent with our earlier studies. So we looked at high school test scores, ACT scores, total math credit earned, high school graduations, and college enrollment. All of these outcomes show the same patterns in that the positive impact were only found in schools that had small sorting, but no impact for schools with large sorting. So schools that produced larger impact on earlier high school outcomes did produce larger impact on college persistence and degree attainment. And the reason why we didn't see the impact in 2004, we think this is because very few schools in 2004 had high course compliance and low sorting levels. In 2004, most schools that complied with the policy in terms of course enrollment ended up sorting students considerably. So the average impact disappeared. And this policy or the program and the result is consistent with recent studies on co-requisite approach in higher education, which is the talk, the next talk. So basically what we are suggesting is this is alternative to remedial or developmental education. So in K-12 settings, before double dose algebra, which is pretty common now, but in the past was more of a tracking system where students are differentiated based on their initial skills and interests and so forth, where you have pre-algebra or remedial math courses and algebra, right? But these today, when all schools are expecting students to complete these college prep sequences, what seems to be effective is really supporting these struggling students while also expecting algebra. And this approach seems to be effective. So implications. Our suggestion is really focusing on prevention rather than remediations. And we had another study investigating credit recovery options in the summer programs, and we really didn't find positive impact of offering credit recoveries. And part of the reason is, especially in math, so we did this algebra credit recoveries, and part of the reason is students who failed algebra ended up failing many other courses. So simply recovering algebra is not really helpful. However, if we can help students not to fail in the first place, could be a really good way and keep students on track to graduate, and this could have long-term consequences, positive consequences. And another important point is some scholars might think that remediating students in high school or even later is not fruitful, right? So early intervention is critical. However, what we're finding is it's not that. You know, we can intervene students in middle grade, high school grades, and even college, and then can have substantive impact on their later outcomes. Also, our studies highlight the importance of ninth grade in high school. It's really important for students to keep on track and not failing in earlier, and failing, you know, course failure accumulate over time, and it's really hard to recover failed courses later in high school. And in math, it's very important to build skills in math and algebra. And also, our studies suggest we need to really pay close attention to how we organize instruction, so that, you know, class composition is, it's really not helpful when students take courses with low skill students, but at the same time, we can support low skill students by, intervening these students. So that's the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nomi. With that, I'll introduce our second speaker for today, Dr. Amy Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin is the Director of Student Transitions at the University of Central Arkansas. She teaches both co-requisite developmental and student success courses. In addition to her research on first-generation college students and first-year experience, she is the author and co-author of several texts, including the College Experience Textbook Series, A High School Parent's Guide to College Success, and Promoting Belonging, Growth Mindset, and Resilience to Foster Student Success. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amy.
Thank you. I hope you can see my screen and you can hear me. I'm unmuted. Those are the two things that I've gotten used to saying this year for sure. Thank you, Dr. Nomi. I appreciate the content that you provided, and I'm going to try to just show you what it looks like in the college environment. In particular, what it looks like at my institution, which is the University of Central Arkansas. We do take those students who we are calling them transitional. I'll share at the very end that we are changing, I'm sorry, not transitional. They're taking transitional classes. We call them conditionally admitted. But I'll share kind of how we're making steps away from that. And we are a department that primarily offers remediation in writing, literacy, and math, and we do the co-requisite approach. So I love the term double dose. That is not what we use, but I love that we could probably call it that, and it'd be a little bit more exciting than co-requisite. We also offer a course on academic strategies. It is called Journeys to Success, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But just to give you an idea of what our conditionally admitted student population would look like, we have criteria for unconditional admission to the university, and then we have a subset of students who are considered conditionally admitted. And you can see right there on the screen that it has to do with their high school GPA, and also their either ACT or SAT scores or an equivalent to that. And so really what it means is we're kind of paying a little bit more close attention to those students, hopefully giving them more support and making sure that they're getting what they need to be on par with students who are unconditionally admitted. And here's just a table. I know this is a little bit old data. It doesn't really vary a whole lot from cohort to cohort. Fall 2020, obviously for every institution, we all took a hit. And so our percentages may be a little bit different for that cohort than they are. But the past few years that I've been at the University of Central Arkansas, about 31% of our students who come in as first-time entering freshmen are considered conditionally admitted. And that may be a shock to some people. It certainly is something that not my institution is, if I just randomly pull somebody off the campus and ask them, what percentage, they would probably be surprised that it is as high as it is. Just goes to show me and the work that we do that it's really, really important to the health of our first year students to be able to offer the supports that we do. So what we do is we offer what is called co-requisite transitional courses or co-requisite developmental courses. This information comes straight from our website, which I can put into the chat whenever I get done with speaking on this, if you'd like to kind of see how we lay out this information. But basically, right now, UCA uses only the ACT or an equivalent score to place students into developmental math. I'll explain in a little bit that we're moving towards multiple measures. We just haven't gotten there yet. It's kind of complicated. But we offer a math sequence depending on the student's degree plan. So we have the opportunity for quantitative literacy with foundations of quantitative literacy, college algebra with foundations of college algebra. And then just starting this fall officially, we are going to have one remediation, and it's called Foundations of College Literacy, that we pair with a general education course. In our department, it's going to be history, philosophy, or religion. High courses that require intensive reading. And so we put that with the Foundations of College Literacy, where students get intensive reading and writing support for that. So what does it look like? You know, Dr. Nomi showed some information about the double dose college algebra, or not college algebra, algebra classes in the high school. And ours looks like this. Basically, that student is taking 2 different courses. They're both 3 credit hours each. They are within the same semester. That's why they're considered co-requisite. And it really is just-in-time remediation. It is skills review. It is coordinated curriculum. So whatever they're doing in the college level course, they are then working on discrete skill building in the foundations course. And students have told us that they really, really appreciate the just-in-time nature and the relevancy of the content that they're covering in the foundations course. And it's really, really important, I think, that students see that those 2 courses go together and they fit nicely, and they work in concert. And we certainly strive to do that. So just a little bit of data. To kind of give you a sense of how things have gone. We have really high success rates in our co-requisite courses. And so you can see we've split them out in terms of C rate and D rate. And we do that because in our college math classes, D is considered passing. Everything except our Introduction to College Writing, which, by the way, we used to have 2 different courses, one for writing, one for reading. Now we just have 1 course, but you can see that data for the UNIV 0310. We separate that out because oftentimes whenever we discuss pass rates and then people realize that we're talking about D or higher, they go, well, wait a minute. So we want to just show you that our rates are comparable, if not a little bit above the course completion rates at our institution for those that are just in the college level. And I have to say that we have done a really, really good job moving students through that first course, that gateway course, with the co-requisite connection versus a standalone. And I'll show you in this graph kind of what it looked like before we instituted co-requisite. So the measure for student success that we are using is a student who completes their college level course within their first year of college. And that is important because the remediation, the standalone remediation we used to do was they took an intermediate algebra, for example, their fall semester, and then they took the college algebra the spring semester. We're finding that students, even if they pass the intermediate algebra standalone remediation, they weren't necessarily going straight into college algebra. So there are a couple of benefits to co-requisite for us. One is students complete their remediation and their college level in 1 semester. So they're getting through that college level faster. And then also they're more successful in that college level than they would have been without the co-requisite. And here's another, this table shows you ACT scores, because a lot of times we'll have people say, well, that sounds great, but I bet it only works for students of a certain ACT score. You're going to see that even though the outcomes for a 15 and 16 are lower than a 17, 18, they are much higher than they would have been in the standalone sequence, standalone than the college algebra. So I don't have a graph for our college algebra common final, but we outperformed those that did not have co-requisite on that final as well. Another look at our co-requisite data. In this case, it was our Foundations of College Writing. Again, we're not offering that anymore. Now students just take the Foundations of College Literacy. But before the co-rec, and we've had this co-rec for quite a bit, almost, we're working on 10 years pretty soon. You can see that students who completed within their first year writing was 24%. After the co-rec, it jumped significantly, and we were kind of holding steady about the 80% mark. So huge, huge gains there. So that is our co-requisite support for our conditionally admitted students. I do want to talk a little bit about a course called Journeys to Success, and it is a 3-credit-hour student success course that is very common on college campuses. Sometimes it is required for all students. Sometimes it's required for only a subset of students. In our case, anyone can take it and enroll in it. It does count towards the degree plan in general education, but we do require it at this time for our conditionally admitted students. And some of those topics that we cover in Journeys to Success: managing time and tasks, building a personal and professional network, developing college level academic skills, working with others, planning for the entire college experience. And we are finding that those kinds of support content is really essentially helpful for those students that may have struggled even in high school to do the things that they need to do to be successful in college. And a little bit of data about the outcomes for students in ACAD 1300, which is what we call it as well. This is our satisfactory academic progress and measure, and that means that at least a student enrolls and completes in 67% of the course credits that they've enrolled in at a 2.0 or higher. That's how we measure one element of success of our students. And you can see that before we instituted ACAD 1300, that percentage was about 64%, and then it's hovering very similar to the co-requisite numbers as well. So we have a lot to still do, and I can certainly entertain some questions. I want to give plenty of time for Dr. Rhinesmith to show kind of the nitty-gritty details about how well co-requisite works. But we're working on removing the language. I think that has already happened, that is termed conditional admission. Everyone is admitted to the university. Some have requirements. We still have developmental requirements or transitional requirements, but we don't use that term anymore. Changes in placement into developmental courses, we are increasing the ACT benchmarks, or we're actually meeting the ACT benchmarks because we do not at this point. And we're adding high school GPA as part of the measure to whether you're taking a developmental course or not. We also have some 1-credit elective support courses that are wildly popular. Who knew that academic strategies would be an exciting, sexy course? But I'm getting a lot of great feedback from students that they really, really appreciate learning more about how to study, how to take notes. We often incorporate growth mindset principles into all of our co-requisite or foundational courses, and really doing some work on that with our math class in particular. And then our next steps, I mean, we've got great outcomes now. We just need to look at the achievement gaps around race and ethnicity and around gender, and continue to work on improvements there. So some key takeaways, if I have time to say them. When appropriate, with appropriate student support, I believe students can and do achieve. You just saw some of the data there. We really were intentional about our courses being high quality and high value. We do not waste students' time and money, and we give credence to their feedback about, and we've made changes, considerable changes, based on whether they felt like they were getting what they were supposed to be getting out of those courses. We keep faculty up to date with research-based strategies, innovations through professional development, and if you are interested in learning more about that, you're so welcome to let me know, and I'll send you some information. We also have noted that it really is fundamental to have a faculty-student relationship. That's the key, not just the content, but also that relationship is really key to our success. And we have found many, many ways to enlist the support of campus partners and families. And a lot of that is really through helping them understand what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, and what their student benefits from. I've talked to a lot of parents who have asked me, why is my student having to do this? After I explain to them how to get out of doing it, they often will want the student to actually do it because they're that excited about what we do. So I know I said a lot and said it really quickly, but I want to make sure that I give time to Dr. Rhinesmith. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Amy. And with that, I will introduce our last speaker, Dr. Evan Rhinesmith. Dr. Rhinesmith is the Director of Research and Evaluation in the Prime Center at St. Louis University. He's also teaches research methods in the School of Education, and his research focuses mostly on evaluating education policies and issues related to Missouri and how these impact education stakeholders and education across the state. He has researched college remediation, post-secondary access, and the impacts of financial aid and merit-based scholarship programs on student outcomes. And finally, he is the Associate Director of the SLU YouGov poll. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Evan.
Hello, everybody. I know we're butting up against time here, but I'll try and stay on pace so everyone can understand. We're going to talk about different approaches to remediation, specifically the perils of standalone and promise of co-requisite. So you've heard a little bit from both Dr. Baldwin and Dr. Nomi talking about different approaches to remediation. And here's where we're going to pick it up in this presentation. We'll talk about education as college education as basically a necessity now, how students are deemed prepared for college education, how institutions respond, and then some rigorous research on both standalone remediation and co-requisite remediation, specifically some work from Dr. Baldwin, myself, and our colleague, Dr. Keith Packelhofer at University of Central Arkansas for some of our preliminary findings. And then we will discuss the implications and considerations of all of this information taken together. So, post-secondary education as a necessity. Over the past several years, college graduation rates for the population in the US ages 25 to 34 has remained relatively flat in the US. Recent estimates and rankings moved the US from 14th down to 16th on the OECD rankings, staying relatively flat over a couple of decades now. However, about 2/3 of recent graduating high school classes have at least enrolled in a community college or a university in the year following high school graduation. Along with that, there's research from the Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University that shows simply enrolling in college leads to increases in your potential earnings, to the point now that many view post-secondary education as a requirement rather than just an option for some students. That being said, enrollment in post-secondary education is one of the most popular, if not the most popular option for recent high school grads, leading many students to participate in college-going activities such as college entrance exams. One of the most popular entrance exams is the ACT. Nearly 2 million students participated in the ACT this past spring for the class of 2020. ACT scores are, if you're not familiar with them, on a scale of 0 to 36, and it's a test that covers 4 different subjects: reading, English, math, and science. Your score on these 4 different subjects are intended to serve as a benchmark for preparedness for college and career. If you meet ACT's readiness benchmark, it is predicted that you'll have a 75% likelihood of earning a credit-bearing grade in your introductory first level college course, so Composition 1 for your English score on the ACT. However, this presents a couple issues. The question that should pop up is how many students participating in the ACT are meeting the benchmarks in every subject or failing to meet the benchmark in at least one subject. Along with that, how many students who fail to meet a readiness benchmark attempt to enroll in post-secondary education? And finally, what do post-secondary institutions do when these students who are deemed as underprepared or unprepared apply for college education? Looking at some of the ACT benchmarks, here we show the US and Missouri trends in the percent of students who are meeting all 4 readiness benchmarks. For the state of Missouri, we had been about 30% of our students who took the test for meeting all 4 readiness benchmarks, outpacing national averages. Now we're about a quarter of our students who meet all 4. So that means that 74% of the 1.7 million students who participated in the ACT in the class of 2020 failed to meet at least one college-ready benchmark. For the state of Missouri, 76% of the 53,000 students in our state failed to meet the readiness benchmark in at least one subject. However, this has not deterred enrollment trends for post-secondary education. For the class of 2018, which is the most recently available data for college enrollment, almost 70% of recent high school graduates at least enrolled in post-secondary education in the fall of 2018. For Missouri, this was 64% of the class of 2018. So even though we have a lot of kids who are being told they're not ready for at least one subject, they're still giving college the college try, if you will. Well, how do colleges respond to that? Rather than turn these students away, they admit them and place them into remedial courses. Oftentimes, these courses cover basic or high school level material, but still come with the price tag of college tuition. Additionally, these remedial courses, in a lot of cases, have not counted towards graduation. It's an additional barrier that a lot of our students have to clear in order to enroll in their first college level class. Recent research from Judy Scott Clayton at Columbia University found that nearly half of all students enrolling at a university or a four-year institution, and about 70% of community college students said that they took at least one remedial course during their time in post-secondary education. A lot of times the way that this is determined, either at the institution level and at the state level, is that they'll use students' test scores on an admissions test like the ACT to determine course placement. For the state of Arkansas, the statewide cutoff is a score of 19 on the English, reading, and math sections of the ACT. If you score an 18 or below, you're assigned to a remedial course. Florida uses a similar cutoff, but students can only complete their remedial courses at a community college. Missouri has recently changed to use a statewide test score cutoff and then additional multiple measures to determine placement. This is becoming more and more common. Instead of relying strictly on one measure, they'll rely on multiple, but students would still be assigned to a remedial course if they're deemed to be underprepared. Typically, the approach for remediation at the college level, as Dr. Baldwin was describing in her presentation, is standalone or a prerequisite approach, where a student enrolls in their remedial course in the fall, and then they take their college level course if they pass the subsequent spring. There has been quite a bit of research recently on the impacts of standalone remediation policies, where researchers leverage students' entrance exam scores and compare these students who scored just below the cutoff to those who scored right at the cutoff and were able to bypass the remedial course taking. A meta-analysis on 11 studies that use this regression discontinuity approach found that the results suggest placement into developmental education is associated with effects that are negative, statistically significant, and substantively large. Looking at these outcomes on passing their first college level course, students who were assigned to remedial courses were 7.9 percentage points less likely to pass their first college level course after going through prerequisite remediation. These students also earned about 2 fewer credits during their time in college and were 1.5 percentage points less likely to eventually earn a degree of any type. So let's make some meaning of these results. If we look at just some example Missouri institution and students' path through college, each square in this represents 10 students. So let's say we have 1,000 students that enroll in our hypothetical institution. Missouri's current remediation rate is about 17% of students will have to enroll in a remedial class. Our current BA attainment rate in Missouri is 37.5%. If remediation reduces that likelihood by 1.5 percentage points, for this class of 1,000 students who enrolled, we would expect to award 3 fewer bachelor's degrees. That sounds small, but when we take this out to the fact that about 20,000 of Missouri's public high school grads for the class of 2019 enrolled in a 4-year post-secondary institution in the state of Missouri, we would have 3,400 students enrolling in remediation. And continuing to implement a standalone or prerequisite approach, would reasonably expect that we would have 51 fewer bachelor's degrees awarded for the class of 2019. This becomes problematic when we have a statewide goal of 65% or 60% of our adult population holding a college credential. Prerequisite remediation seems to be a barrier to our state meeting that goal. An alternative approach then to sort of rectify this barrier that we've created is the co-requisite remediation model, where students enroll in both their remedial class and their first college level class simultaneously, as Dr. Baldwin was describing in her presentation. There is emerging research around this approach. The Community College of Baltimore County increased college level course completion for students who are assigned to co-requisite remediation at a fairly substantial clip. For the pilot year of Tennessee implementing a co-requisite model, 55% of community college students in these pilot institutions passed their first college level course, compared to 12% in the years prior. Once they went statewide with their community college approach for co-requisite remediation in Tennessee, there was a new evidence that students were much more likely to pass their first college level course after going through the co-rec model. I believe it was an 18 percentage point increase in the likelihood of passing their first college level course after experiencing co-requisite instead of prerequisite remediation. Evidence in university settings, however, is much more limited, but we have some preliminary findings of what might be, according to our search, the first examination of co-requisite remediation at the university level. So we use student level data on remedial students at all the public four-year institutions in the state of Arkansas between 2009 and 2018. And we examine how the shift to co-requisite remediation in both English and math at the University of Central Arkansas impacted student outcomes. So we're comparing the standalone approach at these other institutions to UCA's approach. For our sample of English students, we have about 17,000 students statewide, 1,300 of whom enroll at UCA between these two time periods, 26,000 students in math, 4,200 of whom are at UCA. The timeline is a little bit different for co-rec in the two subjects. UCA implemented English co-rec in 2012 and math co-rec in 2014. So you'll see some differences in the sample size here with our results. Like I said, we're examining the effect on the first college level course performance. So Comp 1, college algebra, or other math class that they could have enrolled in. We conduct 3 different comparisons, the first of which is all the four-year institutions in the state. The second is excluding the flagship institution of the University of Arkansas and the state's open enrollment, historically Black college, University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff. And our third comparison is the two most demographically similar institutions for Arkansas Tech and Arkansas State. So for some preliminary descriptives, like I said, for English, 2012 is when UCA switched to the co-requisite model. We violate the parallel trends assumption, which I'll go into in just one second. But we see that most kids were earning a C, some more Bs than Ds, but for the most part, for the GPA level of first college course performance, students at UCA were falling a little bit below earning passing grades than the rest of the state's trends. However, after the co-requisite model went into place, we see an uptick in the first college course GPA, meaning that more students were earning a credit-bearing grade. Similar trend in mathematics over time. When we look at the more rigorous controlled model of co-requisites impact on student achievement, we limit for math or for English to these 3 pre-year trends, the 2012 year and then up to 2015. For math, it's 2011 through 2017, looking only at first college course success rates. In each of our models, we're controlling for a host of student demographics, including student race and gender. We look at ACT composite score as a baseline achievement level, high school GPA, financial aid information such as expected family contribution and Pell eligibility. And we use institutional level fixed effects to control in our model as well. And we find the following. For English, there is an increase in the first college course GPA, looking at the first comparison, which is all institutions for UCA students, an increase of about 0.15 GPA points improvement. So that's more kids getting a B rather than a D in this case. And it is statistically significant at the 5% level. When we shift to excluding the flagship and University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, still a positive result, but no longer statistically significant. When we zoom in on the most demographically similar institutions, it's 0.2 GPA point improvement for students who went through co-rec versus pre-rec remediation in English. Math is a much stronger story for the full statewide comparison, where it's almost a third of a GPA point improvement, statistically significant at the highest level, at the 99% confidence level. Story holds across when we exclude the flagship and University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, almost a quarter of a GPA point improvement in that first college level course. So again, more B's and A's than we see D's and C's in this case. The result is slightly less pronounced when we look at the demographically similar institutions, and it's only marginally significant, but it's still 0.15 GPA point improvement in their first college level math course performance. So taking all of this evidence together, we see that there's pretty strong evidence that the standalone and prerequisite remediation model is presenting more barriers than supports for students who are testing at that underprepared level. We're seeing a lot more states shift to co-requisite models, and there's emerging evidence that this does alleviate some of those early barriers. Positive results in the community college setting in Tennessee and in other states, and Missouri has some preliminary descriptive findings that show better early success rates. Our study that we've described here is one of the first examining co-rec at a four-year institution and finding similar results that students are more likely to pass their first college level course after experiencing co-requisite remediation. It's important to note that there is not really any strong evidence that students in co-rec persist into their second year or graduate at higher rates than students who go through the prerequisite model. Preliminary findings in Arkansas are similar with null impacts on persistence. We just don't have a long enough runway post policy shift to be able to really say with any confidence, because we like to use the 6-year graduation rate on universities. But taken together, it seems that helping students their first college level course through the co-requisite model is a good way to get them to earn college level credit. However, removing those supports in subsequent courses and years is probably not the best way to help students through their remaining coursework. And additional supports would likely go a long way in helping students through college successfully. And with that, thank you so much for your time. If you have questions, you can reach out to me via email or follow me on Twitter. You can also follow along with the Prime Center on Twitter or email us directly. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Evan. And I've provided that information here in the chat. So if you'd like to sign up to follow us on Twitter or sign up for the newsletter, I want to thank our panelists today for speaking with us. It doesn't look like we've had too many questions in the Q&A. I know there's one question for Dr. Nomi that she's going to respond to, but didn't have maybe as much information on the specific topic. Maybe we could just address that quickly, Dr. Nomi, just basically related to summer bridge programs. And if you could maybe just provide a little information for the group today.
Yeah, so I responded in the chat, but so I don't know personally of the bridge program for the purpose that was described here for specifically on math. Usually summer is spent for remediation or just general, summer programs. But doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I said I'm happy to look into it. And one program that I know of is the federally funded Gear Ups, but I don't know about rigorous studies. It's not a randomized studies. It's self-selections, and I haven't seen any of the rigorous studies. Doesn't mean impact doesn't exist, but that's unknown. But there are some programs that are impactful. So from that perspective, I wouldn't be surprised to see some positive impact. Not sure about the long-term consequences, but general approach to support students, early enough and then get ready for these academic, courses. I think it's consistent with programs that are, found to be effective.
Great, thank you. So with that, I know we're running short on time, but I would like to thank everyone for joining us for the webinar today. Again, we hope you'll join us for future webinars. So again, in the chat, we posted the sign up for our newsletter and following us on Twitter, which is a great way to find out about upcoming events and webinars. And we look forward to engaging with everyone soon. So thank you and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.